In the last 2 months, many awesome things have happened, and with 8 months out of applying to TU Delft, as I'm walking this home straight, those awesome things, by grace of God, they just keep on coming. Right now, I feel better than ever, mentally, physically, spiritually, and it was a process getting here. This process is one of the things I wanted to make sure I documented. At some point in the middle of February, I started getting tired and depressed. This happens every winter as they tend to get mind-numbingly dark out here in Sweden, and when I'm not careful in taking the necessary steps as to account for that, I end up really conflicted with a lot of my habits and areas of my life that I want to develop with him. So somewhere in the middle of the first 2 courses that I took, I just completely discharged and did the bare minimum so as to not fail school. Thankfully, communications was super easy and I learned enough programming before the crash so as to pass the course with only doing maybe 3 weeks worth of work. This lasted for a while when I wasn't really doing anything other than playing Elden Ring till late at night. I even installed League of Legends and tried to convince myself that I maybe was just missing fun in my life, which seemed to me to be the case after the first couple of games that I've played with my friends because it was just so fun. Soon, however, I'd inevitably started to suffer the dopamine depletion, and when pornography came into the picture and when thinking of development no longer looked more attractive than that, I realized that I was no longer in control. The thought of that and the failure to see beyond tomorrow terrified me. With the help of therapy, prayer, meditation, training, listening to Goggins and Peterson, exercising self-control, I started to climb out of the pit. At that point, even my experience of doing something similar and the knowledge of there being a better place on the surface didn't help at all. It really was only faith that I could lean on. Faith in that there was a better state of being. First, what I decided to do was to forget about the ties to the identity of a committed, driven, and motivated person. I felt like I was holding on to that for so long, and yet the only outcome of that was that I was always disappointed in myself because I was unable to reach a certain standard that I'd achieved sometime in the past. I'd built such an elaborate story around that particular standard that if I'd not completely disregarded that and been ready to start from scratch, I would forever remain imprisoned by the constant comparison. The biggest reason for the lack of action, however, wasn't the disappointing expectation, but the fact that I was taking the will to act for granted. Weirdly enough, despite thinking of action in terms of a standard that's been blown way out of proportion, I didn't consider the fact that doing what I do takes tremendous effort and a lot of self-motivation and focus and even courage. This is something that I'd been reminded of during my therapy, and it was the last nail in the coffin of the hiatus. I built systems and planned routines, and practicing them was now very different. Before, I would just rely on some preconceived notion that I effortlessly enjoyed those things and that it was only a matter of time until my quote-unquote habits developed, and then sooner or later start feeling sorry about myself when that ceased to be the case. Now, on the other hand, I'd embraced the fact that those things are supposed to suck, and the fact that I don't enjoy every second of the process is an inevitability, no matter how habitual the behaviors are. Because the only thing that I allow to enter the picture the second I start underestimating how much effort I'll need to exert to accomplish the tasks that I set out for myself in a given day is failure. Now, this admittedly entails patting myself on the back more, which sounds like a contradiction, but putting myself below the challenge and then struggling through it and then realizing the success in that creates this absolutely divine feeling of accomplishment every single day. I've mentioned that right now I feel better than ever, and this is the exact reason why. I'd made the mistake of trying to feel as though I'd gotten used to the climb, only to realize that bracing and pushing into the difficulty and the discomfort are the only things that glorify this process. I talked a lot with my therapist about drive and motivation and got to reflect on some great concepts that really helped me with what I'm doing. One of them being the concept of value direction, meaning indulging in value-based behavior as opposed to an outcome-based behavior. Contemplating this opened my eyes to the significance of the present rather than focusing so much on the higher aim. With that, in addition to the aforementioned recognition of the necessity of effort, my daily actions have become more rewarding and meaningful. Also, surprisingly, quitting worrying about making everything I do better helps me make everything I do better. Doing things because I want to be a person that does those things makes much more sense than doing things because I want to accomplish a certain goal, as the former makes every session feel meaningful while the latter makes it all just going through the motions. I've cleared programming and communication, which now leaves only Physics 1, Physics 2, and the degree project. I have until January 3rd to complete my application at TU Delft. As of right now, I'm doing Swedish 3 and Religion, both of which require a bunch of reading and writing in Swedish, and I'm not enjoying that bit at all. These are the last boring courses in the entire syllabus though, and in a month I'll be through with all of them. maybe I can enjoy these last moments of doing a work I despise, as that won't be coming back anytime soon. I've also managed to find an amazing job for the summer, which is literally 50 meters away from my home and not physically draining. It also has 24-hour shifts, which means the other half of the week will be free. And that means I'll be able to go into weeks upon weeks of thorough learning, and I can't wait for that, especially because that learning will be Calculus 3 and differential equations. But more on that in the engineering progress video. Furthermore, my ADHD evaluation is slowly coming to an end, with the last drug test remaining. Then I hope we will come to some conclusion, perhaps even a prescription, so I'm quite excited about that. With how I've been training for the last year, the 98 kilograms on the scale don't mean what they used to 2 years ago. I've got plenty of extra weight to drop before I go back to eating on a surplus and lifting big. Intentionally eating on a deficit is also a new experience, and I've only been doing that for maybe 2 weeks, during which I'd managed to lose 2 kilograms. Not being constantly full of food and spending less time in the kitchen is liberating, and to feel like there are no loose ends takes much less effort now. So currently eating 300 grams of pasta and 500 grams of chicken with a stray apple here and there, which amounts to around 2,000 calories. If I don't drop to 95 kilograms before May, I will lower the intake. The goal is to drop to 90 and then get back to my current weight, but eating cleaner and training better. I'm putting a lot of work into physio again and starting to incorporate it as a staple in my training, as by the time I'm ready to bulk, I want to be sure that no funky shoulder pains can hinder my progress, and also because it's become apparent that lifelong physiotherapy is what my wonderful body apparently requires. I am devouring book after book, and my bedtime reading is now one of the highlights of my day. I recently picked up The Spiral Wars, which is a space opera that so far has scratched all of the itches I've had for ancient threats to civilization and space naval combat. Because of the books, I make sure to go to bed early enough so that I manage to satisfy my urge for reading, which usually means that I'm in bed at about 8:30 and read until 10 or 11, and then I sleep. Laying there in my dark room lit up only by a tiny little desk lamp, listening to ambient music and reading this giant epic is my quiet refuge. Quest refuge, what? Laying there in my dark room, lit up only by a tiny little desk lamp, listening to ambient music and reading this giant epic is my quiet refuge that I look forward to all day. I wake up at around 7 a.m., hit the gym or the pool, then come back and start studying, and it feels very satisfying and smooth. Towards 7 p.m. I usually sit down for a piano practice, which also has been going great as I found a splendid tool for learning sight reading, and now I finally have the feeling of building towards something great rather than learning separate songs from scratch each time I begin a new one. Meditation is difficult, but not impossible, although I'm definitely looking forward to meditating more. Going into short meditation sessions during prayer and studying is what I'm currently doing, and that feels great. My studying is going absolutely phenomenal, and that in turn makes my entire life as such. This is the last year before applying to university, and I remember vividly how I would daydream and conjure up visions of these last months of the self-learning journey. The way it's shaping up right now, however, is orders of magnitude better than anything I'd ever imagined.